Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming this morning. As you know, we've been holding budget consultations prior to the budgets for the past about 3 years, where we go out to members of the public, including universities, and ask for people's input. One of the feedback that we've actually received recently, in recent times, has been that people have said to us, well, it's okay, you come in, talk to us, get our views before the budget, but what about after the budget, when you deliver the budget? We want to know some of the specifics regarding the budget. And so this is why we've done this. We started off about a week and a half ago, and we started at USP, and we've had at various campuses. Yesterday we were at FNU in Natambua, and last night we were in Votolevu. Tonight we're in Korovuto, reaching out to the public, and of course we're in Lautoka and Ba tomorrow. And on Monday, Tuesday, we go out to Savu, Draketi, and Lambasa. Now these sessions at the universities, it's open to everybody, but during question time we ask the lecturers to leave and the academics to leave, because these sessions are specifically for the students. This is why we have it at the university, because what we found in many of these sessions that the students feel a bit inhibited if they have the lecturers or the tutors around. They cannot express themselves freely. We've had, for example, at FNU, where we've had the lecturers leave, so students have actually complained to us about some of the workings of the university and indeed about lecturers and the lack of qualifications, etc. So for those of the lecturers and academics, please leave after the presentation, and then we can have an open floor, so to speak, with the students. We'll very quickly, I'll give you an update on the budget and some of the economic fundamentals regarding, for example, things like debt. A lot of people talk about debt without necessarily understanding debt and other fundamentals, and before I open it up to the floor. So as soon as I do a quick presentation, and then we'll open up to the floor and you can ask questions regarding the presentation. Now, what we're doing is essentially the budget has a huge focus on Fijian families, building up the family fundamentals on families. It builds upon the previous budgets. We still have continuation of large-scale investment in infrastructure, roads, water, electricity, education, and of course, access to health. We've built upon the sort of strong economic position that we are in. In fact, many of the things we've actually put in the budget, we gave clues for this about 2-3 years ago. And in fact, some of the things we put in this budget, if somebody is clever, they'll know what we want to do for the next 2 to 3 years. So what are the major expenditure initiatives? The first one, of course, is the $1,000 for the newborn babies. The way this works, essentially when a child is born, if the family or the mother, if she's single, earns $30,000 or less, then they're entitled to get $1,000. And from a practical perspective, the way it works is that you must register the baby. Many people in Fiji don't register their babies when they are born. This is why, for example, when you go to a few weeks or a couple of months before the school term starts, you see a huge rush at the BDM office, Birth, Deaths and Marriages office. We have to open it late at night, we have to open it on Saturdays, because people have not registered their children because they need a birth certificate to go to year 1. So in this way, we're incentivizing people to actually register the babies early. In fact, about 3-4 years ago, we did a sweep around Fiji, and we found something like 25,000 Fijians did not have even birth certificates. Some of them as old as 45 years old, 55 years old, who did not even have a birth certificate. So the condition is you register the baby, you go to BDM office, there's a form you fill out, and then, excuse me, you have to forgive me, I've got a cold, a flu actually. And you register the baby, you get a form, you fill out the form, and on the form you write which bank you want to open the account with. They'll give you a letter, you immediately go to the bank, you open the account in the baby's name. The person who can operate the account, in other words, the authorized signatory to the account, will be the mother. And you immediately can access $500. The second $500 you can access once the child goes to year 1. Now, the reason why we're doing that, obviously people need money when the child goes to year 1. But we're also trying to create a culture of savings. In Fiji, we're not very good at savings. So if there is an account in the baby's name, so maybe when the baby turns 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, some relative gives some money for the baby's birthday, you take the money, hopefully you deposit into the account. So you're trying to create a culture of savings. Now we've been asked the question saying, will we pay this $1,000 if it's my 10th pregnancy? Yes. If your first, second, third, fourth, whatever number of pregnancies you have, you get $1,000 per baby. If it's twins, you get $1,000 each for the baby. Somebody's asked us, will we get the $1,000 if it's a teenager who falls pregnant and gives birth? Yes. So every mother is entitled to this as long as they earn $30,000 or less. Maternity leave, we've increased it from 84 working days to 98 working days, an additional 2 weeks for women who need maternity leave. This obviously brings us in alignment with many other countries, and of course we want women to spend a bit more time whilst they are expecting. We've introduced a new paternity leave. Paternity leave, of course, is applicable for fathers of babies. And so if you're about to become a father or have become a father, you're entitled to take 5 days off. We want more fathers to spend more time with the children. Maybe change a diaper, learn how to change diapers. So this entitles you to take those 5 days off. You obviously don't have to take it all off at once, but you can do that prior to your partner giving birth or even after. We've also introduced 5 days family care leave. Now this, we see a lot of people, for example, they're not sick themselves. When you get sick, you take sick leave. But this is, for example, if I'm here and then suddenly I find out that my father's, had a heart attack and he has to go to hospital and there's nobody to stay with him. I have to take 2 or 3 days off. What a lot of people do, they take annual leave off. They eat out of the annual leave. But this now gives you specifically 5 days for family care leave. So if your son gets ill, your daughter gets ill, your husband gets ill, your wife gets ill, you can actually take these days off, and it's paid leave. So these are additional leaves that we put in place. We've been asked, somebody said to us, well, people may abuse it. They might say, oh, somebody's sick when really nobody's sick. Well, that's true, people can abuse it, but we are trusting them to do the right thing. The whole psychology behind this is that if you're getting all these additional, paid leave off, you will hopefully, when you come to work, give 120% at your work, because you now know that you have all these certain privileges that you weren't entitled to previously. So it's creating that sort of good working environment and relationship. Of course, employers who now pay paternity leave and family care leave are entitled to 150% tax deduction. We recognize for some employers that we want to ease the burden on them, so they're entitled to 150% tax deduction. Of course, your university won't be entitled to 150% tax deduction because they don't pay tax. But they'll have to pay paternity leave and family care leave. Education, you can see that this is where education was made free, primary school and higher education, secondary education. And this is when TELS and toppers was introduced. And as we've seen, as the years go by, it increases because there are more and more people in universities. So every year there's a whole batch coming in. The person who was first year last year is now second year, but you've got a new first year. Then the second becomes third, and then of course the first becomes second, and we've got a new one that's coming in first. So the bill is increasing. There's some additional funding here to pay for the repairs for Winston. And today, in this year's budget, we have $1.035 billion for education. And I'll show you how that's broken down. Ministry of Education gets $535.4 million out of that $1.035 billion. Now, Ministry of Education obviously pays for the salaries of all the primary and high school teachers in Fiji, irrespective of who runs those schools. So it's something like over 10,000 teachers in Fiji. So we pay for all of that. Your subsidized bus fares, textbooks, all of that comes through there, free milk, etc. All the allowances for teachers. And of course, they've had a pay rise recently. Then we have $123.8 million, which is given to higher education institutions. There are 2 types of funding. That's broken down into operating grant and capital grant. Operating is essentially we give a grant for them to run the university on a day-to-day basis. Capital grant is, of course, when you give them money to build things. $104.8 million is given as operating grant. USP gets $33 million. You get $4.2 million. FNU, which is 100% funded by government, gets $65.1 million. They used to get only about $43 million just a few years ago. They're now getting 65.1. We're putting a lot of money in there. CATD gets 0.6. Corpus Christi, Fulton College, Montfort Institute, Montfort Boys Town, Sangam, Vivekananda Technical Colleges. All of these ones are certified by the Higher Education Commission. And there's a particular formula in terms of the funding for this. Capital grants, we've only given it to FNU. They're building a new campus in Lambasa, upgrade of Nasinu campus, building vet labs, hospital, this is for Coronivia, for the animals. And Fiji Maritime Academy is getting $5 million. We're spending $90 million in the rehabilitation of high schools and primary schools. Some of this is a spillover from Winston because we have to pay off the contractors. Some of them, of course, is to do with the damages caused by Josie, Gita, and Kenny cyclones. Kandavu, for example, a number of schools got completely demolished, so they have to be rebuilt. Now, $43.8 million goes towards the toppers, and you'll see in a moment as I'll show you, the toppers actually has increased in numbers. We've increased the number of topper scholarships. TELS this year alone is $205.6 million that's costing us. Excuse me. Civil service scholarships, we've introduced some new scholarships for that, and other scholarships training that we've introduced for that. So that's essentially the breakdown of the expenditure itself. Toppers has gone up from 630 to 950 places in the toppers area. And of course, this is not applicable to you because you're all now at university, but those of you, your family, friends, relatives, brothers and sisters coming along, the numbers have increased. Of course, this is applicable for those people who have completed year 13 or foundation. And again, the toppers is still skewed towards the science areas because there's a shortage of people in the science areas. We've offered 20 new scholarships. These are for people who want to pursue studies in areas where there's no undergraduate courses available in Fiji. So for example, if somebody leaves year 13 now and wants to do architecture, no university in Fiji offers an undergraduate study in architecture. So we will actually pay for them to go overseas, but there's only 20 positions left. There'll be more details given on this. We're working out the details. Should there be more than 20 people, how will we select the 20? But you can see the number of the areas of study we want people to pursue. Town planning, architecture, actuarial science. There's not a single actuarial in Fiji. FNPF, RBF, all these organizations, they need access to actuarials, but we don't have any actuarials in Fiji. Not a single Fijian actuarial we have. Occupational therapists, clinical psychologists. You can see again, these are the areas where we have a shortage of skill sets. The number of toppers is 970. We're offering new local awards for teachers. So 30 awards for teachers holding a diploma. We have a number of teachers who only have a diploma qualification. We want them to upgrade to a degree level. Some of them are very good teachers. So we'll give 30 awards, but in these areas. The huge shortage of teachers in maths and physics and science in all these areas. But also language, which is in English. The level and quality of our English has actually deteriorated significantly. We need more specific teachers in those areas. I remember when I was in high school, which is many decades ago, people who were teaching us English had master's qualifications. Very few people, for example, if you go to high school now, who will actually have a master's, say, in a specific area of study who will be teaching in high school. Information technology, industrial arts, special education, early childhood education. Then we also have 20 awards for teachers holding a bachelor's degree to upgrade to postgraduate degree. And to do, obviously, PhD too, in the area of maths, physics, and English. We have 10 overseas awards for postgraduate studies based on public sector needs, and we will be determining those needs. Obviously, we, for example, lack expertise in what I may call deep science in marine biology, forestry. These are the areas that we need to obviously develop. We have a lack of expertise. Very few civil servants actually are well qualified, in terms of postgraduate studies. I think there's only about 1 or 2 civil servants who actually have a PhD that actually are working in the civil service. You go to many countries, a lot of civil servants have masters and PhDs in specific areas. There used to be a trend in Fiji at one point in time, everybody went off and did an MBA at USP. Wasn't necessarily relevant to their line of work. We also will have 40 awards for masters, of which 20 is reserved for civil service in the civil servants, in these areas: teacher training, tourism, agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. it does not preclude anybody that's working in the private sector to actually access this award. So I may be working for a hotel chain or a hotel over here, and I can, if I want to upgrade, I can also apply. So we're also encouraging people from the private sector, as long as you come back and work in Fiji. Similarly, we have 10 awards for PhDs, 5 are reserved for civil servants, the other 5 are for anybody in Fiji, in a specific area. We started giving, equivalent of TELs to students with special needs. So we have one lady, for example, in USP who's about to complete her degree, undergrad degree, but she cannot speak at all. She uses sign language. So these people's allowances, in fact, was not in alignment with what the current allowances were, so we're going to give them the full scholarship allowances. We made some changes to TELs. So before you are eligible for TELs allowances, if your family earn less than $25,000. We've now increased the threshold to $50,000. So those of you whose family incomes were $25,000 and above, but less than 50, you'll now be eligible for the TELs allowances also. You can claim that should you wish to do so. We've increased bus fare allowance to $30 per week for students because we know some of you travel from Bar and various other places, so this will help you with your traveling. We've also created 30 places for graduates to get entry into MBBS. Now this is targeted specifically for those people who may, for example, have done an undergrad study in, say, science or have become a pharmacist. They may be now working and they want to become doctors, so we've got 30 places reserved for them because obviously there's a shortage of doctors. We want more doctors to come through the system. Now there's a TELS Accelerated Repayment Initiative. Today in Fiji, ladies and gentlemen, 50% of the population is below the age of 27. 70% of the population is below the age of 40. Excuse me. So all of you who are 40 and above are in the minority in this country. Those below the age of 40 are the majority. We have a very young population. When you have a young population, it means, to be frank, we'll get more babies. Young people tend to produce more babies. So in a few years' time, those of you, some of you, hopefully not too soon, will start making babies. We'll become mothers. But what that means is that there are many people behind you or who will come after you who will also need access to free education. Primary school, secondary school, they'll need TELs, they'll need scholarships. So those people who are going around and telling you we'll make university completely free are speaking a lot of nonsense because it's unsustainable. Already, the debt from TELs is over $700 million. That's how much we've already spent in giving allowances and paying for university fees in over $700 million. To say that you'll make university completely free is unsustainable because you'll have to take money from somewhere else and you cannot continue to do that. The reality is that we need to also focus on primary and secondary schools. There are many secondary schools in Fiji, in certain parts more, in certain parts than others. They don't even have a science lab. Some of them don't even have computers. We are more focused on that. But the reason why these people who are going around saying this don't talk about it because high school students don't vote, university students vote. So what we have done, however, is that we've been looking at this as to how we can expedite payment. We've done calculations. So a person, for example, who's doing a Bachelor of Education, and assuming they're getting the full TELs allowance, they're picking up all the allowances, they're getting the fees paid for them, the debt would be approximately $34,000 once they complete. What we're saying to them is that if you finish, once you've finished, and remember, you don't start doing a repayment until you start working. So assuming you finish university and you're not working for 3 months or 6 months, you don't have to do any repayments. And when you do start doing the repayments, it's only maximum of 20% is payable of your salary. So no more than that. What we are saying to you, if you finish, or if you pay 50% of your debt in 3 years or less, we'll write off 50% of the balance. Okay, so if you pay 50% of your loan in 3 years or less, we'll write off the other 50%. If you pay 75% within 3 to 6 years, we write off the other 25%. If you pay 90% within 6 to 8 years, we write off the other 10%. It's called an accelerated repayment system. Now, excuse me, I was asked this question yesterday at FNU. When we started off TELS, if you came from a low-income family, etc., we need always guarantors, or anybody need a guarantor if you got TELS. That's now no longer applicable. We don't need guarantors. So you finish your studies, you're working here, you're doing a repayment, that's fine. But if you leave Fiji, even if you go for a holiday for 2 weeks, we need somebody to give a surety or a guarantee that you will actually pay the debt, or they will pay your debt in the event you don't come back. There have been people who've actually left Fiji. Now, that is wrong. If we're paying you through government revenue, taxpayer-funded education, and you simply want to get educated and migrate and not pay, that's wrong. So this is why we get a surety. Of course, it doesn't mean that if you finished your studies and you're working and then you want to migrate, you can migrate. Please pay your debt before you go. So you can pay your debt even if you pay within, so even if you say migrating, and hopefully very few of you will migrate now, that if you paid within 3 years or less, you pay 50%, we'll write off the other 50%. No problem. So that's the only time that we need a guarantor if you're leaving the country for a short period of time or in coming back. We actually have some people now who have finished their studies, but they are now employed by people, companies in Fiji, who send them to work in other Pacific Island countries. That's fine. You can do that. The employers have given a guarantee saying that this person, is working with us and deductions are being made. There's no problem with that. Now, we've created a new Ministry of Housing and Community Development with a budget allocation of $41 million. The rate of home ownership in Fiji is very low. Very few people in Fiji buy their first home when they are below the age of 30. Many people tend to buy it within their 30s, over 30, or maybe late 30s, early 40s. We want young people like yourselves to start buying your first property before you reach the age of 30, I should say. But we have to change our concept of what is a home. We traditionally think a house is something that's you have a block of land and you have a house in the middle of the land. But we should also look at homes as strata titles. What is strata titling? You can have actually a big building with different flats on each floor. 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, somewhere can be 4 bedroom. That's the new way of looking at also homes. It's also a lot cheaper when you buy strata titling. That could be a first property. Assuming you've come out of university, you've got a job, you're getting paid $25,000, $30,000 a year. Maybe after a couple of years, you want to buy a property. You may be able to buy your first bedroom flat for about $60,000, $70,000. And we're currently working with some people that can make it affordable at that price. $60,000, $70,000, you get, if you apply for approved strata title developers, we'll give you actually $15,000 as a contribution for you to purchase your home. The moment you buy your first home, it becomes your asset. From that you can grow. So assuming you're single, you buy an asset worth $60,000, you may get married, both of you now have double income, combined income, you may want to buy a 2-bedroom flat, or you may resell your house and buy a house on a block of land. But the whole idea is just getting you to start owning your asset very soon. We had this last year too and the previous years, but we refined it. So now we give $15,000, $10,000 if you earn less than $50,000. If you earn more than $50,000 and less than $100,000, you get $10,000 and $5,000. And you have to go through the banking system. You have to apply for a loan from the bank, and then we give the money to the bank as a contribution towards your loan. We also contribute towards you purchasing your first land. This is specifically for e-tauke lease and state land. We don't give the money to you directly. So you've seen, for example, a lease, TLTB says, look, there's a lease available, but you have to pay $15,000 and then you do your yearly lease payments. You apply for that. We'll pay $10,000 as our contribution towards to e-tauke Lands Trust Board or to Ministry of Lands. We also have what we call an interest rate subsidy Last year, excuse me, last year we made an announcement that low-income families who get the home grant are entitled to get subsidized interest from various banks. So certain banks, what they've done, the Reserve Bank of Fiji has made funding available to these banks at 1% interest rate. And then the banks lend to these new homeowners at 5% or less. So for example, HFC is charging, I know for some of the accounts, 4.3%. So if you go along from this financial year, we'll reduce a further 1% from that 4.3%. So instead of paying 4.3%, you'll pay 3.3%. We made an allocation of $1 million. So that's to incentivize you to buy your properties. So in that way, the burden is less on you, and for the first 3 years, your interest rates are fixed. There are many people, for example, who live on what we call agreements for lease, but don't have a proper lease. And the reason why that is because the land is not surveyed. So we will actually pay for the survey of the cost. You go to places like Vudi, Nosori, a lot of people have been living there for years, but they don't have a proper lease because the land has not been surveyed. So we'll pay for the surveyor's cost so you can get a proper lease. The moment you get a proper lease, you can go to the bank and borrow money because you can use that as security or as collateral. Excuse me. All of these forms for this are all available at Legal Aid. So we've made it easier for you. You don't have to go down to Suva. If you want to apply for this, you simply go to a Legal Aid office and you fill out the form and they'll take it to the Ministry of Housing. They'll send it for you. If you want to apply for this, you simply go to a bank, any of the bank branches. We have, of course, also a social housing. This used to be within the Ministry of Provincial Development. Used to go to the DOs, etc. We're now changing the policy on this. It'll be with Ministry of Housing, but some new information will be rolled out in regards to this. We obviously are continuing with our issuance of proper leases or informal settlements. Now, before I go into the next slide, at the moment, say you're a student, and because you have what we may call a lean budget, if you wake up in the morning, you're not feeling well, and you feel like you have to see a doctor, you won't go to a private doctor because it may be a bit expensive. So you'll go to the nursing station or health center, or you go to the Lautoka hospital. Now when you go there, there's a long queue. But why you want to see the doctor, or the reason why you want to see the doctor, is not for some major problem. You're not having a heart attack, your limbs have not been cut in a bad way, but you simply want a doctor to see whether you've got a bit of bronchitis, you're not feeling well, maybe perhaps give you a prescription. Now many countries in the world, including countries like Australia and various other places, you'd never go to the public hospital for that. You actually go and see a private doctor. You go and see a local GP, as they say, general practitioner. We are introducing this from next year. So from the 1st of Jan of next year, you can go and visit a private doctor in your area if you've got some minor ailment. And generally most people, that's what they go and see a doctor for. So, and we will pay for that. What we also want to do is want you to develop relationships with doctors. So for example, if I live in this area here, if there's a doctor over here, and the moment we start doing that, you'll see more doctors will come out to areas where there's a lot of people living, because they know they've got a good client base. They can make money from there. So if I live here, I'll go and see the doctor in this area. My wife will go and see the doctor. My children will go and see the doctor because he or she becomes our family doctor. So you develop a relationship. I'm seeing him for 3-4 years. Next time something happens to him, I say my chest tightens and all that, he knows my history. He will then say, hey, this is unusual, I think you better go to Lautoka hospital because you may be having a heart attack or something. So that's what people have. People have family doctors. Great idea, but who's going to pay for it? Right? We'll pay for it as government, but where will we get the money from? That's the question. Now, at the moment in Fiji, for the past 30 years or so, or even more than that, several about there, people, any employer, even this university, I think you are not exempt. You have to pay 1% to the FNTC levy. Any employer whatever salary bill you have, 1% of that you have to pay as a levy to FNTC for training. Even government contributes towards the FNTC levy. Approximately, FNTC collects $21 million a year. They already have $30 million sitting in the trust. Most people who pay towards it actually don't claim it back. You can claim it back, most people don't. So what we are saying, from next year, 50% of that $21 million that we collect on an annual basis will pay for your GP cost. That's where the money is coming from. That $21 million, 50% of that will pay for your GP cost. You go to places like Nambuwalu, Korovo Town, Nasarawanga, Senganga, there's no private doctors. There's no private doctor here. If you're some other country, there would be a local GP in this area. But most people don't, because they said, who's going to come? Because, maybe it's seen to be a low-income area, so most of them will go to the health center or the hospital. In this way, you're encouraging doctors to come to wherever there is population base. And we've also in the budget made some allocation to fund the doctors to go to remote areas to set up their practice. Now, at the moment, if for example one of your lecturers at this university has a fall while he or she is at work, and they fall down the steps and break their back, they're at work. Now, the employer of your lecturer has to have workers' compensation. They have to have workers' compensation because that lecturer needs to be paid out because he's been injured at work. A lot of companies in Fiji don't have workers' compensation. Recently, there was a man I know who died. He was doing a subcontracting work. He was a truck driver, driving a truck somewhere in Kayasi. Truck rolled back, truck tumbled, he got crushed to death. His employer did not have workers' comp. So for an employer to get access to workers' compensation payout was very difficult. In the same way as we have third-party insurance. If you, under the old law, which we just changed in January this year, if you're standing there on the side of the road, under the old law, and somebody comes driving along and he's drunk and hits you, and you become a quadriplegic or paraplegic or you die, you won't get paid out because he was drunk. Insurance companies did not cover that. If you have some kid that's coming out of the school, a young child, running out in front of the bus, gets hit by a car, dies or gets injured, you won't get paid out. This is the child's fault. Why did he run out in front of the bus? That, of course, has changed now because that was what we call our fault system. We now have what we call a no-fault system for motor vehicle accidents. We've had a number of payouts recently. Children, unfortunately, run out in front of the bus, they got hit by a car, they've been paid out because we don't assign blame. In the same way, a lecturer who may have fallen down the steps, the employer might say, no, I think he contributed to his injury because he was a bit drunk. Hopefully your lecturers don't come to work drunk, but I'm just giving you an example. So, it's what you call contributory negligence. So from the 1st of Jan of this year, or next year, sorry, I should say, there is a no-fault system for workers' compensation. People simply get paid out. So the way the system works, assuming I'm working in a furniture factory, I'm sewing timber. And as I'm sewing it, I accidentally slip, my finger gets chopped off. How it will work is that there's a price for every part of your body. Your limbs are insured. So my finger if I'm right-handed, is more valuable than the finger on my left hand. So I'll get paid out a sum. If I want more, then I go to the court system. But when I get paid out through the system, the no-fault system, there's no lawyers, nobody's involved. I simply fill out the form, everybody establishes you at work, you get paid out. Whether I was fooling around and accidentally did it or it was the employer's fault, it does not matter. But I'll get paid out. So 40% of the $21 million will go towards workers' compensation. And 1% will continue to go to the FNTC levy. We've also paid up what we call basic insurance. Sugarcane farmers, rice farmers, copra farmers, dairy farmers, all covered under this, under the various agricultural organizations. But what we've decided to do is also government will take out an insurance policy for social welfare recipients. Assuming I'm a social welfare recipient, so I'm not necessarily, I don't have that much money. If I die, then my children or wife who may be dependent on me will get a payout of $3,000, a basic cover. They may not even be able to afford my funeral, so they'll get $1,000. Or if our house catches on fire, you immediately get a payout of $3,000. So we're looking after them. But it also means less burden for government. We're covering our own risk. You can imagine if somebody who's poor and their house burns down, who will they come to money for? They'll come to us. So in this way, we are covering our own expenses by taking out an insurance policy. And we've extended that to civil servants and members of the disciplined forces. We are currently working with the World Bank to get insurance cover for houses, for cover from cyclones. As you know, recently we had home care and help for homes. We've paid out, in one instance, help for homes, $125 million. People got those cards, you could buy hardware. And of course we had home care, where we paid out $110 million. Of course, we know some people have stolen from the system. Some people made some false declarations. Hopefully, we'll get less people doing that in the future. But government cannot keep on doing this every year. If we get a cyclone every year, we cannot simply be forking out $100 million, $120 million. So we're trying to cover our risk now. And we've allocated $1 million for funding for the insurance premium. So the way it works is what you call parametric insurance. So assuming this is Fiji and the cyclone path goes through here, all the homes that are insured, we don't have to come and individually inspect the homes. They have what we call parametric insurance. You get paid a lump sum. Could be a basic cover like $3,000. Everybody in that area gets the payout. So we're covering ourselves. And also we're doing a similar thing for crop insurance. We hope to actually have these insurance products in place before the cyclone season starts in November. We're really keeping our fingers crossed on this. We're spending a lot of money in ICT. You may have heard that FNU, all the 24 campuses, will now get Wi-Fi, all of them. We just launched it at Natumbua. But we're also creating what we call Wi-Fi hotspots around Fiji. In a few weeks' time, you'll have Shirley Park. There'll be Wi-Fi. So you get much faster speeds, and you'll also get broadband will be quite wide. So you can go and upload, download, and all those sorts of things. But we're trying to create safe spaces for people to go to be able to access, social media and various other services. We've done it in Sukuna Park, we'll be doing it in My Super Park. Every single town will get that. We're trying to create a culture of people using technology. We've also, Wailesi now, of course, if you go to the southern tip of Lau, you go to Rotuma, you go to Vikumbia, you go to the interior of Ba, you go to the interior of Naitasiri or Vanuatu, you can catch Wailesi television, either through a dish or you get the set-top box, or just a simple aerial and a set-top box. What does it give you? It gives you free-to-air television, and it gives you 8 channels. No monthly subscription or anything like that. I urge you to take it. Those of you who earn less than $30,000 a year, we're giving it to you for free. There's a budgetary allocation for it. If you earn more than that, you have to pay for it. It's about $95. We have something like 80,000 users of Wailesi already in Fiji now. 80,000 set-top boxes have been issued. We also now, through Wailesi, you can, through your phones, you can watch those channels on your phone now. 80,000 people have already downloaded the app. So assuming that this evening you're going home, you're on the bus, and you said, oh, the TV cameras were here, I want to see if I came on TV or not. Let's watch the news. You can actually watch the news on your phone. You can watch anything. You can watch parliamentary channels. You have all the other channels that you can watch on your phones. So that's all through the Wailesi app too. We are also developing various mobile phone apps for government services. Very soon you'll be able to register your children, babies on your phones. You do title searches, company searches, all of that will be available. We are working with the Singaporeans who are well known for this, and they're developing that. But what is really interesting is, excuse me, there are a lot of jobs in the ICT sector. We've now got a scheme with the Singaporeans We'll be identifying people, students. I don't know how many of you study ICT. You can actually apply for internships. Because in a couple of years' time when they leave, we want young Fijians to actually be running these platforms for us. A lot of job opportunities in that space. This is very important for us. This is the promoting electronic transactions. Assuming you go to the shop, you've gone to the supermarket, and you bought $50 worth of groceries. You don't have any cash on you, but you have your ATM card. So what you do with the ATM card, you swipe it on the machine. That machine is called a POS machine. Point of sale machine. POS is point of sale. When you swipe your card to pay for your $50 worth of groceries, you get charged immediately 40 cents by the bank. And the bank charges the merchant or the shopkeeper 30 cents. So they make 70 cents on each transaction. Now we want electronic transactions to become a lot more available everywhere. So we've been talking to the banks. So from the 1st of Jan, when you go to buy or pay for your groceries at a point of sale machine, there won't be a single fee charged to you. It'll be free transaction for you. But the merchants, we're still negotiating for them to bring down the price for the merchants from 30 cents to perhaps 5 cents or 10 cents. This is why when you go to some of the shops, see, I can walk into New Zealand 7-Eleven store and buy a bottle of water with my ATM card. I don't really have to carry cash. I can buy a bottle of water. If you try and going to do that in your shop over here, they'll say, go away. Some of them places they'll say minimum purchase $10, right? So the reason why they do that, because they say they have to pay 30 cents. If they buy a bottle of water, $1.50, I have to pay 30 cents. That means my cost is $1.20. I'm only getting $1.20. My margin is very little. So we're working on that to try and reduce that also for the merchants. But for you, you no longer have to pay the 40 cents from the 1st of Jan. Now, we obviously also want the more merchants to have point of sale machines. I don't know if the local shop here has it. So we're going to subsidize people to actually have point of sale machines. A point of sale machine, a POS machine, costs about 500 Australian dollars. It's about 750 Fijian. So we'll subsidize up to 1,000 machines for more shops to have it. Now, what's the other reason why we like point of sale machines? You see, for example, if I I have an ANZ account. So when I swipe my card and I pay the merchant may, for example, have a Westpac account. When I pay the $50, the money immediately goes from my ANZ account to his Westpac account. Now, if the merchant had all the transactions, all the sales, if he did it all on electronic transactions, he doesn't have to do banking anymore. No cost for banking. He doesn't have to sit in his car, physically take the money, go to the bank. It's all banked already, credited to his account immediately. So it reduces the cost of banking and all that. But the other point is this. When you have money being transacted and it all stays within the system, that means there's cash in the system. I hope you get what I'm saying. So when I actually make a transaction, I pay him. I don't physically take out the money and pay him. If all of you were to go to the bank and take out your money physically from the bank, the amount of cash in the bank system reduces. But if you all paid each other electronically, the money keeps on circulating within the banking system. Now, when the money is not taken out, that means there's a lot of cash, there's a lot of liquidity. When there's liquidity, when you want to go and borrow money, the cost of you borrowing would be less because liquidity remains high. If people take out money from the system, there's less cash in the banks, and when you want to go and borrow money, they say, look, you don't have enough cash, but I can lend it to you, the interest rate will be 8-9%. But when there's a lot of cash in the system, then of course the interest rate will be less. So it's for your benefit also. As far as health services are concerned, we obviously continuing with the funding for that. We're setting up 2 kidney dialysis centers. Dr. Krishnan, who's the only nephrologist in Fiji and indeed in the South Pacific, we're working with him very closely. He says there's approximately about 600 kidney patients that may need access to kidney dialysis. If you earn less than $30,000, we subsidize 50% of your dialysis cost. There'll be one set up in Nandi and one set up in Suva. But let me tell you, there are more people in Fiji dying of cardiovascular problems, or what we commonly call heart attacks, than any other illness at the moment. It's a big problem for us. We're setting up a public-private partnership for Ba and Lautoka hospitals. I should have mentioned to you, I'm accompanied this morning by the Permanent Secretary for Economy, Makreta Konrote. I also have Shiri Gaundur, who's the head of fiscal policy. Kamal Gaundur is in planning. And of course we have Pankaj Singh, who's our head of debt, and also Isoa Talimembao, who manages our budget, our day-to-day expenses in the budget area. Shiri and the PS and I were recently in India after the budget was delivered, or it was passed, where we met various stakeholders. And what we're doing now is we essentially will be giving out Lautoka and Ba Hospital in concession, in a form of a concession, to a hospital provider or hospital services provider together with FNPF. But we have certain conditions attached. They must have, for example, 24/7 cardiovascular services available. At the moment in Fiji, if any one of us in this room now, God forbid, has a heart attack, there's nobody in Fiji that can carry out an open heart surgery. There's not a single Fijian doctor who's available 24/7 to be able to offer that service to us. That's why most people go to Australia, they go to New Zealand, or they go predominantly now to India. So that's part of the condition. The other part of the condition is they need to provide full chemotherapy services. People have cancer now. We need oncology services too, in a professional manner. The other condition is that they need to build a new wing at the Lautoka Hospital, which will also include new operating theaters where you have viewing areas. Some of you may be medical students here. You do not have a operating theater in Fiji at the moment where you have a viewing area. So we're doing the surgery and you have people on top that can actually view the surgery. Many what we call, university hospitals have that. So that's part and parcel of the condition. We hope to finalize the successful bidder in the next couple of months. And then we'll see those changes taking place. Very quickly, sugar and agriculture. The sugar, we continue to provide the new subsidies that we introduced last year. A new farmer assistance, weedicide, fertilizer subsidy, sugarcane replanting. As we've said, our focus is on your input cost reduction. See, somebody can come along and say, we'll give you $100 a ton. But what if it costs you $90 to produce that ton of cane? Your margin is only $10. If you, for example, get $85 a ton, but your cost of production is $60, then you have a margin of $25. That's what we need to be able to look at, is what's the cost of production. And what government is focused on is trying to help you to reduce your cost of production by giving various subsidies. We've also set up a sugar stabilization fund. The way this works is this. FSC has sold some assets, they put aside some money, and government will contribute in subsequent years to the stabilization fund. So what we've said, for the next 3 years, all cane farmers will be assured of a payment of $85 a ton. Whatever the world market price is. As you know, we're now subject to world market prices. We no longer get subsidies from the EU. So assuming next year, if the world market price is $65, the farmers will still get $85. The difference of 65 and 85 or of $20 will come from the stabilization fund. Assuming the following year, the price that FSC gets is $95. The farmers will still get $85. That additional $10 will go towards the fund, because you never know, in the following year it could be lower. So that's how a stabilization fund works. It stabilizes the price, we give a guaranteed price. So the farmer does not have to worry. I don't know how much I'll get next year. I don't know how much I'll get the following year. You have confidence in the system. Ministry of Agriculture is, we're given additional funding of $96.8 million, it's an additional amount, sorry, I should say, of $10 million. We are very excited about this, building a local goat meat industry. All of you who are not vegetarian, most people in Fiji eat meat, goat meat. Goat meat is very popular, it's very lean. But let me put it into perspective. If tomorrow Crest Chicken were to shut down, and rooster poultry to a lesser extent, most people would not be able to eat chicken. We'll have to import chicken from New Zealand. Some of you are old enough to know that a few decades ago, if you wanted to eat chicken, you had to go and kill one chicken, pour hot water, pull out the feathers, do all that stuff. Now most people want to eat chicken, they go to the supermarket, buy at number 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, whatever it is. That's what they do. So by one company coming in, they've changed the entire poultry industry in Fiji. They've in fact created a poultry industry. But it's not them that's the only company that grows chickens. They farm things out. So they'll go to a villager, they'll go to a farmer, they'll say, look, this is 100 chicks, 5-day-old chicks. You grow this chick for me, in 36 weeks time or whatever it is, I'll come back and buy the chicken from you at this price. They're getting a source of income, and of course, Crest is then doing the slaughtering, packaging, the value adding. We can do a similar thing for goat meat. We do not have a focused way of dealing with goat meat. There's a farm between Ba and Tavua that already have 1,000 goats. And what they're saying is they can grow kids. You know, kids are baby goats. And they can give it out to farmers. They can give them 4 or 5 goats. You grow this goat for us, we'll buy it from you at X number of price. They'll do the saltering. Next time you go to the supermarket, you can get chilled goat meat or frozen goat meat. That's what we're trying to do. At the moment, unfortunately, at times we import goat meat from New Zealand. So we should become self-sufficient in this. Brucellosis-free farms, this essentially again is, our cattle has caught brucellosis and TB. And the way that we have been dealing with it is that, for example, if this is the farm, 2 or 3 cows have actually had the illness, they kill the cows. But what they do in New Zealand, if this is the entire farm, even if one cow has actually caught the illness, they kill the entire stock. And they repasture the farm. And that's the only way you can actually get rid of these things on a permanent basis. So we set aside some money to do that. Civil service reforms very quickly. Of course, we've now introduced, apart from the pay rises, we've introduced the permanent management system. In other words, individual civil servants get assessed. We're going through the process. They'll get paid out in January, backdated to the 1st of Jan. The Itauke Affairs Board and provincial councils, they're not technically civil servants, but we give grants to these organizations. We've brought the salaries in alignment now with the civil service reform, so they've received the pay rise. So we've increased the grants to these organizations. Very quickly, STT and ECAL. As you know that we introduced ECAL, which is Environment Climate Adaptation Levy and Service Turnover Tax. When we introduced this, we passed a law that says that every single cent collected from ECAL cannot go into government consolidated fund, cannot go into the pot of money that government has, but the money must be specifically spent on environment and climate adaptation measures. And we have to publish it. It's published here. I'll give you the website. You can go and access this. So it says, it tells you we collected 170 million. Yeah, Shiri? Last year. 150 million. We collected $150 million last year. This tells you exactly how that $150 million has been spent. We, for example, relocated villages. We got another 43 villages to relocate. Rural electrification programs, through solar programs, etc., cane access roads, all of those things have been done. Now, what we've said though, STT and ECAL was only applicable if you went and stayed at a hotel, rented a car, went to the cinemas, drank beer at a pub or wine or whatever, and you ate at an expensive restaurant. The only 5 places. It does not apply to any other expenditure or any other thing that you may buy or use. You go and eat at a restaurant here in town, you don't pay for that. Unless you go and eat at some expensive restaurant in Denarau, or if you go and rent a car. What we've said now is that those businesses, even in those areas, if they earn less than $1.25 million, they no longer have to pay STT and ECAL. We've exempted them too. So some of you may, for example, if 1 or 2 of you decide after university to open a small motel and have 4 or 5 rooms, you won't have to pay this because your income will be less than $1.25 million. Excuse me. As I mentioned, 150% tax deduction, paternity family care leave. If your employers train you whilst you are working, they can claim the expenses through 150% tax deduction. We're giving a 250% tax deduction if a company does research in ICT and renewable energy. We believe there's a lot of opportunities in the ICT sector. At the moment, if you set up businesses in the ICT sector, you get a lot of tax deductions. There's one company here in Lautoka, we understand, that's doing actually filing tax returns for Australians from Fiji. So there's a lot of opportunities in that space, and we've expanded the definition of ICT. If you go to certain parts, certain towns and cities, certain buildings, it's very deteriorated, dirty looking. So what we're saying to the owners of these buildings, if you invest $1 million or more in upgrading your buildings, you get a 25% investment allowance. Next year we'll be hosting the Asian Development Bank meetings. Never been held in the Pacific. There'll be something like 4,500 people descending on Nandi for 1 week. We'll be reaching out to your university to, if we can see, if we can use some of the students as chaperones. There'll be a lot of dignitaries coming through. So if you want to contribute towards that, if you contribute $10,000 or more, you get a 150% tax deduction. If you bring in an electric bus, and at the moment we're working with ADB and World Bank to get more electric, or to get electric buses. If you buy electric bus, you get a 55% capital deduction. If you set up electric charging station, $100,000 or more, then you get a 5% subsidy. There'll be some changes, a lot of changes in the area of this type of transportation in the next 18 months or so. We've been working on it for the past 2 years. A few years ago, if you brought in these fruits, the duty was 32%. We brought it down to 15, brought it down to 5, now it's 0% duty. So, we don't grow strawberries or kiwi fruits, apples, so we want you to have access to that, so we reduce the duty on that. The duty on tea has decreased from 5% to 0%. We introduced a new excise duty on carbonated drinks, sweetened drinks, fizzy drinks. And so what we found, some of the businesses started importing cheap carbonated drinks from overseas. So we put a specific duty rate, increased the duty to $2 per liter. Of course, this causes a lot of diabetes too when you drink too much of this stuff. And duty on cigarettes and alcohol went up by 15%. What we call the sin goods. Plastic bag levy has gone up from 10 cents to 20 cents. I started on the 1st of Jan. As you know, if you go to the market and you buy a bele, you buy a choria or whatever it is, when they put it in the plastic bag, you don't pay the levy. It's only applicable at supermarkets, service stations and pharmacies. But please be warned that from 2020, all plastic bags will be completely banned. Plastic bags cause a lot of problems for us. Not only has aesthetic issues, but in respect of clogging up drain systems, etc. So you're given like nearly a 2-year notice, so you prepare yourselves. Those of you who are old enough would know that before when we used to go to the market, we didn't have plastic bags. We had what we call joli. You take the joli. Those made reusable bags. A lot of women's groups are actually making those bags. They can use that now. We can make that. Now, we had a policy a few years ago, we put in place a law quite a few years ago, that you could not bring in any second-hand vehicles that was more than 5 years old. Now, what we found, a lot of car dealers, what they started doing is bringing in cars that was like 4 years and 11 months. 4 years and 10 months. The whole idea of bringing newer cars is that you have newer technology. When you have newer technology, you have greater fuel efficiency. When you have greater fuel efficiency, obviously the dollar lasts longer, but also the carbon footprint is less. To incentivize you and the car dealers, if you now bring in a car that's 2 years or younger, then the duty has been halved from 32% to 15%. Same thing if you bring in for taxis. Taxi drivers or taxis used to pay half of 32, used to pay 15, now they'll pay 7.5%. Very quickly, this is the value of our GDP. Our GDP was about 200 million in 1970, then it went up. You can see all the different years, 1 billion, 2 billion, 3.6, 5.6. Now it's gone up to 11.3. And one of the reasons why it's significantly increased is because we've had 9 years of consecutive growth. Of course, the economy of Fiji has grown before too, but we've never had 9 years of consecutive growth. We've had, for example, 1 or 2 years it may grow, then it goes into negative growth rate, then it used to grow again. Now, because you have consecutive growth, the value of our GDP has increased. In other words, the economy has doubled in size in the last 10 years. Very significant. The reason why it's significant because it's important for you because it creates a lot more jobs. So you can see, for example, our economy has been growing here continuously. This was a very modest growth here, nonetheless it grew. The reason why it was modest is because this is where we had Winston. Winston cost us $1.3 billion worth of damage or loss to our GDP. You can imagine if Winston had not happened, we would have been a much longer line here somewhere. Normally projections are done for 3 years, and you can see the we are projected to grow continuously for the next 3 years also, which is of course good news. And that's the result of consistency in policies. And that's very important for people to understand. For the economy to stabilize and grow at a steady rate, you must have consistency in policies. And you must have a particular focus. Now, what's happening to jobs? Unemployment has dropped from 7.5% to 4.5%. It's the lowest it's been in the past 20 years. 40,000 new jobs have been created in the last 5 years. You can see the job advertisements. This is a survey done by the Reserve Bank of Fiji. Up till 2014, they used to take only the surveys of from Fiji Times. They've of course taken the surveys of Fiji Sun now too. This is FNPF new membership. These green lines are what you have new memberships of FNPF. In other words, when people join the workforce, they have to join FNPF. This is an indication of number of jobs. 2017, there were over 20,000 new memberships. But if you take out the people who withdrew from FNPF, some people retire, they withdraw the entire funds. That's about 7,000 people there. So the net FNPF compulsory membership grew by 13,000 in 2017. So you can see the effect of 9 years of consecutive growth, which is actually good news for you because it increases the chances of you getting employment also. Now, inflation. What drives inflation? There are a couple of things that are completely out of our control. Now, most of you eat roti, most of you eat bread in the morning, you have bambakau, you have panikeke, you have scones, you have cakes, whatever. It's a staple food item. But where does wheat come from? Flour come from? It comes from wheat. Where does wheat come from? We don't grow wheat. It comes from Australia. There are only 2 companies in Fiji that bring in wheat to make flour. Punja and Sons, we have down here in Lautoka, and FMF from Suva. They buy the wheat from the Australian Wheat Board. They today may be buying it, say, $1,000 a ton. They buy the wheat, they bring it, they put it in the big silos, and they grind it, add a few things, and you get flour. The moment they make flour, flour is price control item in Fiji, like rice, it's price controlled. So the moment they make the flour, then they go to Commerce Commission and they say, look, we bought it $1,000 a ton, this is our cost to make it, this is our labor cost, this is our transportation cost, whatever it is. Then the Commerce Commission comes up with a formula and says, okay, you can make a 4% margin. That's the price, they sell it to the supermarkets. Then when they go to the supermarkets, then we price control the price at which they will sell it to you because you go to the supermarkets. Then again, they put their own margin and then it's a price control item. Same thing with cooking oil, it's all price controlled. But the point of the matter is this, irrespective whether it's VAT or no VAT, if the input cost is going to be expensive, so tomorrow if the Australians decide to sell the wheat, not for $1,000 but $2,000, we all have to pay for it. Because now the input cost is not $1,000 but $2,000. So the price of flour will go up in Fiji, even though it's price controlled. And the same thing with fuel. The fuel that you use in your cars, in the buses, etc., we don't produce oil. So whatever the price, the fuel lands in Fiji, then we price control it. So you see sometimes, every 3 months the Commerce Commission says, price of fuel has gone up by 5 cents, price of gas has come down by 4 cents, whatever it is. It's all price control items, but it depends on the world market price. So if there's some war going on in the Middle East or Donald Trump decides to make a decision that will affect the production of fuel, or if we have a very cold winter in the northern hemisphere, those of you who want to study this, look at the price of fuel changes. If the crude price of fuel is constant, you'll see that it'll go up when there's a cold winter in Europe. It'll drop when it's summer over there. But of course, at the moment, the price of fuel, only a few months ago, was about $39 a barrel, crude oil. Today, it's sitting around about $62, $63. The other thing that we don't have any control over is cyclones. A small bunch of bananas in Suva that normally cost $5 after Winston was costing $20. The price of Yongona went up to $200 a kilo. Some people drink it at the same rate. Of course, long beans cost $5 a bundle after Winston. Now it's about $2. So when they measure inflation, they look at the everyday usage of goods that you normally buy. That's how they measure inflation. In that basket of goods, there are lots of things, including alcohol, tobacco, and kava. Let's see what happened. 2015, inflation rate was 1.6%. Alcohol, tobacco, and kava contributed 0.6%. The rest of the stuff contributed 1%. Look at 2016, 3.9%, this is after Winston. 2.7% came from alcohol, tobacco, and kava, predominantly kava. The others contributed 1.2. Look at 2017, 2.8%, but these three items contributed 2% of the 2.8%. But the others only contributed 0.8. Of course, it's now changed. As of June of this year, of course this figure can change by the end of the year, 1.7% by these three items, but the rest of it was 2.9. Fuel has almost doubled. So obviously the contribution of fuel, etc., will be a lot higher in this space. Foreign reserves, a lot of people don't know much about foreign reserves, but foreign reserves obviously is important for us to be able to trade. Nearly everything that we have or we use on a daily basis comes from overseas. I'll choose on this lady. This lady is holding a phone that's not made in Fiji. She's got this bag, it's not made in Fiji. She may have gel in her hair, she's got lipstick, none of that is made in Fiji. Everything comes from overseas. All the cars you see on the road, all of them comes from overseas. So when we buy these things, they don't sell it to us in Fijian dollars. We have to have enough Japanese yen. We need euros, we need US dollars, we need Australian dollars. Colloquially speaking, when a country does not have enough foreign reserves, people say, oh, it's going bankrupt, it can't trade. So, you need foreign reserves to be able to trade. This year, this line here is the number of months of trading that you have. International benchmark says you should have at least 4 months worth of foreign reserves to be able to trade. We had $515 million in 2006. Today we have $2.1 billion of worth of foreign reserves. But what is really interesting is this, ladies and gentlemen. If you look at 2010, we had $1.3 billion. If you take a line straight across from here, oh, sorry, it's not a very straight line. It's about 4.8 months worth of trading. So at $1.3 billion, it was about 4.8 months worth of trading. Today we have $2.1 billion, but it's only about 5 months worth of trading, even though that's almost double that, almost. Why? Because we are demanding more overseas goods and products. As the economy grows, people are more consumer driven. So most of the consumer products we have comes from overseas. So it does put pressure on the foreign reserves. So even though we are above the benchmark, the reality is that because we're demanding for more goods and services, we have so many cars, everybody complains about the number of cars on the road. We need, of course, more Japanese yen. As people are getting wealthier, they'll demand for more goods and services. Every day today in Fiji, somebody is getting connected to electricity. We are spending $50 million on rural electrification. What happens when a household that did not have electricity gets connected? What do? First thing they do is buy a fridge. They buy a fridge, they may buy a microwave, they buy their phones so they can charge their phones, they buy a TV. None of these goods are made in Fiji. So as more people get connected to services, they'll demand to buy goods that are not locally made. And that's why it puts more pressure on the foreign reserves also. A lot of people talk about debt in Fiji without understanding debt. Now, I don't want to spend, I'll make it try to make it succinct. When Fiji became independent, we had the Ratumara government. The Ratumara government borrowed money. Then we had, unfortunately, only 4 weeks of Dr. Bavandra government in 1987. So, his government would have had to pay the debt of the Ratumara government. He may have incurred some debts in the 4 weeks to run government. Then, of course, we had the 2 coups by Rambuka in 87, and effectively had a Rambuka government from 87 to 1999. They also incurred debts, but they have to pay the debt of the previous governments, the Ratumara government, and there's any debt by the Dr. Bavandra government. Then you had the Chaudhry government. They incurred debts also because governments run what we call fiscal deficits. Most governments in the world, 99%, run what we call deficits. We spend more than what we collect. So the Chaudhry government would have incurred debt, but they have to pay the debt of the Rambuka government, the Bavandra government, and the Ratumara government. Then you had the Garase government. They incurred debt, they have to pay everybody else's debt. Then you had the Bainimarama government. They incurred debt, pay everybody else's debt. By this stage, probably the Ratumara government debt is paid because it's been over 30 years. Generally, sovereign debts are about 30 years. The term is about 30 years. Then, of course, you have this government, the Fiji First government, incurring debt, paying the debts of everybody else. The one good thing about all the Fijian governments, we've never defaulted on any of our loans. So no matter under which political party, which prime minister, the debt was incurred, we paid off their debt. Now, that is the way it should be, because the debt is not incurred by Ratumara or the alliance government, it's incurred by the Fijian government. The debt is not incurred by the Rambuka government, it's incurred by the Fijian government, so everybody has a responsibility to pay that. So we have never defaulted on any of our loans. When the Bainimarama government was appointed, they inherited a debt of $2.8 billion at the end of 2006, $2.8 billion. The debt today in Fiji sits at 5.1 billion Fijian dollars. The debt incurred from then to there is $3.3 billion. That's the level of debt. Now, there are 2 ways of measuring debt. One is what I've just told you, what you call the dollar value. The other one is as a percentage of your GDP. The GDP is, of course, your gross domestic product. What percentage of that is in debt? Now, as your economy grows, and even though your debt may grow, as a percentage of GDP, it decreases. So more wealthier you are, you have more opportunity to borrow money. Or if you borrow at the same rate, as a percentage of GDP, it will decrease. That's a better measurement of measuring debt. Nominal sum is just a nominal value. I'll give you an example. Just to simplify, I use this with the high school students. Assuming I have $100 and I go and borrow $20, you would say my debt as a percentage of my wealth is 20%. 20 over 100 is 20%. But assuming my wealth increases to $500 and I decide to lash out, I say I'm going to go and borrow 2.5 times more than what I borrowed previously. Instead of borrowing $20, I'm going to borrow $50. So dollar value of my debt has gone up from $20 to $50, but as a percentage of my wealth, it's only 10%. In the same way, a person who's earning $30,000 cannot go and borrow, the bank is not going to lend them $1 million. But a person who's earning $500,000, the bank will probably lend them $1 million. So it depends on your capacity. But the question you need to ask is, what is the debt being borrowed for? If we're borrowing to build, for example, one big nice convention center on top of that hill, which will be used only once a year or twice a year and it's going to cost us $50 million, it's not a good debt. But if you're borrowing to build a 4-lane road that you don't have to build in the future, it's a good debt. We're building a productive capacity. Or we're connecting people to electricity. Let's look at other countries and where they sit on the debt scale. Japan's GDP is 239.2%. Significantly high. Singapore 112, USA 107.4 million. It's the most debt-ridden country, USA, in terms of dollar value. Canada 92.3, but nobody over here in Fiji says, oh, Canada has got a huge debt. or Japan's got a huge debt, or USA's got a good debt. They only talk about Fiji without knowing about it. This is where Fiji sits. We've done comparison with, what we call island countries, Maldives, Seychelles, Nauru, Mauritius. I'll talk to you a little bit about Mauritius later, Samoa, and all these other comparable countries where they sit. Dollar value. What's the dollar value? This is as a percent of GDP. Japan's debt is 11.8 trillion US dollars. In US dollars. This is all in US dollars. Singapore is 332.7 billion. USA is 19.9 trillion dollars. That's their debt level. We, of course, in US dollars, $2.47 billion, which equates to about 5.1 billion Fijian dollars. Now, this is very interesting. You see over here, Japan, as a percentage of your GDP, their debt is 239.2. The dollar value is $11.8 trillion. USA, even though their debt level is much higher, 19.9 trillion US dollars, as a percent of GDP it's lower because why? The US economy is bigger. So the percent of GDP will be less, even though dollar value is much higher. Mauritius is interesting. I went there about 18 months ago, very similar to Fiji, from certain perspectives. They were sugarcane based, but they're now going into tourism. But they decided to do what we are doing, but in a much grander scale. They built a fantastically new airport, 4-lane road, set up ICT parks, etc. And then they invited people from overseas. They gave away land for free, concessions. But the advantage Mauritius has is very close to Africa. Africa is now one of the fastest growing continents in the world. Very young population base, obviously huge demand for goods and services. A lot of the multinational companies want to go in there. But of course there are a lot of negative connotations about Africa, civil war, strife and all of that. So they essentially went and marketed themselves, Mauritians. And they said to international companies, come and be based in Mauritius to service Africa. And that's precisely what happened. They went to India, they got 2 or 3 Indian hospitals, set up base there, and they went to the African and say, you have a heart problem, you have some surgery, complex problem, you can't do it in your country, don't go to India, don't go to France, don't go to Europe, come to Mauritius. And it's precisely what's happening. And by the way, when you have a surgery, you can have 2 weeks holiday in our nice resort. And you see, so they in fact incurred high levels of debt, 7.5 billion US, 62.7% of their GDP, but it's good productive debt. It's increasing the productive capacity. In the same way, the example I've given, I think, in this hall before, if somebody is a fisherman or a fisherwoman and they go out and catch fish, they come early in the morning and they buy the roadside, they said, $50 for a bundle of fish, but they don't have electricity. And you drive past and you say $50 too much. By lunchtime, the fisherman is getting worried because nobody's buying his fish. Now he knows he cannot keep the fish for too long because it can rot. He either has to sell it at a lesser price, or he eats it himself, or gives it away. By 3 o'clock you come by, he's really worried, and you say, you bargain with him, he says, $10, I'll buy it all. He gives it away. It may not even cover his fuel cost. But the moment you connect him to electricity, he's got ice. He's got a cooler. He'll keep the price at $50. In the afternoon, it's $50 too. If he does not sell it, he'll put it in the cooler, puts it out on the roadside again, throws water on it, you drive past, say, fresh fish for sale, $50, and you buy it. It happens. So by connecting that person to electricity, you've increased their income levels. You've increased their productivity levels. So this is the power of connecting people to infrastructure, and if you're borrowing money for that purpose, then it's good debt. Recently, Rambuka said that Fiji is going to be, our ports and our seaports will be taken over by the Chinese. A lot of nonsense. When government borrows money, we don't mortgage our land. We take what we have a sovereign debt. A sovereign debt is when an institution or entity lends to you, they know you're a government, you'll pay it back. There's a sovereign guarantee. Now our debt, we manage it in a couple of ways. We make sure that at least 70% of our debt is onshore. borrowed from entities from within Fiji. And 30% is from offshore. Because it's not good to have a high level of foreign debt because you get what you call foreign currency fluctuations. So if you borrow in US dollars and if the US dollar goes up, you actually have to pay more. This is the level of overseas debt we have and who we owe money to. ADB, 348.5 million. Agriculture Development, 2.2, International Fund. World Bank, JICA, Exim Bank of China, Global Bond, $416.2 million. Our total foreign debt exposure is 29.7, in other words, external debt. Now, the debt with China, I can tell you what those debts are for. There was a small debt that was taken out by the Garase government prior to 2007 to build the ICT center, physical building in near Berkeley Crescent. You go there, it's still there. But since then, the Beni Marama government has borrowed money from the Exim Bank of China. The last amount borrowed from China was in 2012. But the monies were borrowed for these projects, I can tell you now. Nambuwalu Draketi, tar sealing of the road. Buddha Bay, tar sealing of the road. Sawani Seria, tar sealing of the road. Singatoka Valley, tar sealing of the road. Moto Ba, tar sealing of the road and building bridges, etc. In Moto, those of you who know Moto, who know you've got a nice big bridge now. And you have the Rewai subdivision, public rental, flats. And of course the Housing Authority subdivision in Tadirua. They are the 7 projects. So it's false actually, it's very irresponsible to say that our assets will be taken over by these people. If they're, for example, building the Nambuwalu Draketi road, we don't say to the Chinese, okay, you can take this road once if we don't do the repayment. That's stupid. Now, just very quickly before we come to the end, 1980 to 2006, 27 years, capital expenditure was 3.5. Now, the 2 types of expenditure, like I explained to you, one is your operating expenditure, one is the capital expenditure. Operating expenditure is day-to-day running of government. We've come here, we've stayed at the hotel last night, the fuel expenses, the salaries, etc., the toilet paper, photocopying paper, whatever it is. The day-to-day expense of running government is your operating expenditure. Your capital expenditure, of course, is when we set aside money to build things. Capital investment. From 1980 to 2006, $3.5 billion was spent in capital expenditure. Debt increased by $2.6 billion. 2007 till now, 11 years, capital expenditure was double that, $7 billion. Debt increased by less than 2.6, which is $2.3 billion. What is really interesting is this. For every dollar of capital expenditure in the years between 1980 to 2006, 76 cents was borrowed. For every dollar of capital expenditure from 2007 till now, only 36 cents is borrowed. Why? Because we have what we call operating savings. You can see this is the level of savings that previous governments had. And we've of course been trying to increase our savings. Last year we saved about, how much did we? Last financial year? $850 million. This year we anticipate to save about $1 billion. So when we have that savings, then we use that to build things. Then when we want more money to build more things, that's when we go out and borrow from the market. So the more savings you have, the less you have to borrow. This is why we borrow only 36 cents in a dollar, because we have more savings. Now this just shows that we spend about 40% of our budget on capital expenditure. So, very family-oriented budget. It builds upon previous budgets, like I said. There's a number of clues that we gave previously, going for 9 years. Now, all of these figures that I've shown you is available here. You can Google these figures, you can go to the RBF, all those figures you can verify. What you'll find on the website is all this information. This is the budget book. So, this has the expenditure of every single ministry, even the departments in the ministry. So let me just open a random page. So I've opened here. It says, Head 19, Republic of Fiji Military Forces, Policy Administration, Program 1, Activity 1. So that's the page, and you'll have over here exactly how much is going to be spent for each item. So it says here, let me read it out. Sorry. Officers and other ranks, this is salaries, $6.1 million for this particular department. Personal emoluments. Books, periodicals and publications, $12,500. Overseas training, discipline services, $816,000. Computer rental and maintenance, $3,000. OHS expense, $10,000. This is what the Auditor General then checks and goes against these figures. So if you're interested in any of the ministries, you can actually go to the website and you'll get all these figures to know which ministry is spending how much and where the monies are going to. You'll also then find on the website these flyers that were actually put out in the Fiji Sun as packages some months back, but you can also get in soft cover. So this says electrification, rural electrification projects. So it's got listed. So for example, it's got over here, Harry Charan and Sanjesh Prasad, Vuna Kamandawa Subdivision, Koravuto Nendi, number of applicants 13, total cost $34,000. These are the people who get connected to the grid. Then you have Tonge Village, Bar, 16 applicants, $24,000. So everybody that connected to electricity this year is all listed. So, I've had people call me up previously and say, hey, my village is listed there, when are we getting connected? So you can also go and check, it's done by Division 2. So that's there. You also have the Water Authority Fiji, who will get connected to which water, how many water tanks, what's the size of the water tank. Same thing with FRA. Then you get infrastructure sector, all of this in soft copy is available on the website. And you can get all that information there. I also urge you as university students, and also as future leaders of our country, to read that 5-year and 20-year development plan. We used to have 5-year development plans. After the first school in 87, the Rambuka government stopped it. We didn't have a development plan. We've now started this. So we've got a 5-year and a 20-year development plan, which basically sets out, how we're going to build sustainable cities, which areas we'll be focused on. Of course, when, for example, the land leases in Vanuatu was not renewed after 1999, the cane production in Vanuatu halved by 50%. So we have areas where there used to be sugarcane farms, shops, schools, they've all shut down. Buses no longer run there because people no longer live there. Most of those people are now living between Suva-Nosori corridor as squatters. That's why when there's a soccer match, you see all the Lambasa flags in Suva. Because a lot of them are there. So we need to take account of this. Like I mentioned to you, 70% of the population is below the age of 40. Those of you who are below the age of 40, in about 30 years' time, you'll become old. So how will we factor in that into our medical services? What will be the kind of illnesses? Where will the population growth be? So we have to take account of that. We have to plan ahead. So all of that is in here. Please read that. All the information is available. So now, thank you for that. I'd like to now open up the floor for any questions. If I could, before we do that, if I could ask all the lecturers to leave, please, because I want to talk to the students. So you feel free to be able to ask any questions, anything you may want to raise with us. Please feel free to do so. Thank you.